So first of all, thanks so much for having us here today. Just from the perspective of the Dementia Network, I'm often asked to give 10 or 15-minute presentations or distill big ideas down into one page. So it's a bit of a luxury to really walk you through this process that we've used to implement the Teepa Snow positive approaches to care. And just as Kelly said, our objectives for the presentation will certainly touch on positive approaches to care and what that model is about, but really what we'd like to focus on is what's the process that we've gone through to get to this point, to really look at how do we strategically implement across a system a new way of doing things and support people in translating these new skills into their day-to-day practice. So I'll walk you through a bit of the foundational piece that was established through the activities of the Champlain Dementia Network to support this kind of capacity building initiative. And then between Bonnie and I, we'll talk more about what was the systematic approach we used towards implementation of this specific initiative, building on this foundation, and what have been some of our learnings to date, and particularly around what have been some of the critical success factors. So foundationally, the Champlain Dementia Network, it's been around in one iteration or another for many, many years. It's representative of providers, we have family caregivers at the table, researchers, we have people living with dementia who are engaged at the working group level, and it's quite a solidified, long-standing partnership. And it was really when they put together their 2013 regional strategy, the integrated model of dementia care, where the work started to get organized around a number of pillars that enabled us to get to the point that we're at today. One of those pillars being education and training. Somewhat unusually and very fortunately, we received annualized funding from the Champlain LHIN to form an education and training collaborative. So that sits under our network. It's comprised of educators. Bonnie sits at the table, researchers. We have post-secondary institutions, and the mandate for this funding was to coordinate and integrate dementia education and training opportunities and to build cross-sectoral partnerships. And certainly the membership is reflective of that. So we have all of the key players. We have palliative care sitting at the table. We've formed partnerships with Stroke, with the Champlain Community Support Network, which is a key partner in this Teepa Snow rollout. But you know, one of the problems with that kind of a collaborative is you can very quickly fall into an exercise of increasing outputs. So if we're responsible for coordinating and integrating education, how do we increase the number of educations or trainings we offer annually? So the way we tried to focus our work instead was how do we work from an outcome perspective of really supporting translation of that education and training into practice. So we worked with two main pieces to help us in this work, and keeping that idea in mind that we were focused on outcomes, capacity building, and not purely increasing numbers. The first was that we spent about a year developing a competencies framework. So if I'm working with people living with dementia, if I'm a family member, if I'm a volunteer, depending on what setting I'm in, what are the kinds of knowledge, skills, attitudes that I need from novice through to expert in working with people with dementia? And similarly, if I am navigating or care coordinating for someone with dementia, from novice through to expert, what do my competencies need to be? And that helped us to begin to situate where do different, particularly our first focus has been with staff, where do different staff members fit within those different levels? What are the types of education and training that are most meaningful to help them build those competencies? And what does so we have consistency across levels, but then what does the interplay start to look like across levels? So this this is really at the heart of so much of the work that we've done. We can't build capacity if we don't understand, well, how does an intermediate access an advanced professional? When are they making referrals to whom and for what reasons? And then similarly, how do we build the knowledge level at novice intermediate by having the right linkages with those upper levels as well? The other thing, as Kelly mentioned, is that very early on, we as a collaborative decided that we would be working within the context of that BSO knowledge exchange framework. So we looked at different ways in which we could promote this idea of we create a concept, we spend time really assessing staff and observing staff in their settings, talking to them, understanding where they see gaps and deficiencies. We develop tailored education that fits the needs that they've identified and that we see, and then we actually are there to coach and mentor people in putting that education and training into place. So those two pieces were really the essential foundation for the work that has come since then. So every fiscal year since then, we've tested out those two components in different ways. So I'm going to speak to each of these briefly. So in 2016-17 in Renfrew County, we decided to, and were able to allocate some of our funding from the collaborative towards hiring a dementia navigation specialist, and we received funding support from the LIN as well. So the whole idea was we could hire another FTE of a person who was providing care coordination to people living with dementia, and that would build some capacity in the system. But what if we hired somebody who was an advanced level of knowledge on our dementia knowledge pyramid and expert on care coordination, and rather than going in and focusing solely on providing direct service to clients and families, they really started to become an embedded resource within the system that staff who were already performing those functions could access as a resource. So through that process, the specialist was then able to identify learning needs, provide some tailored education, and provide ongoing coaching. And I'll give you an example. The Renfrew County Community Paramedicine Program is extremely active in working with people with dementia. They were expected to be playing a care coordination role. And in reviewing where they sat on the competencies framework, they really understood that they had a ways to go before they were at the novice level on the pyramid and intermediate on care coordination. So then she was able to provide the modules, integrate them in their orientation, do ride-alongs with them when they were going to see clients so they could really translate that into practice. Last year, in a similar way, we embedded an advanced expert coach in 4 adult day programs within the Ottawa area. They were chosen specifically because they had varying stages of dementia within their programs. Their staff were at different levels. And so again, the coach went in and through observation and talking with staff and volunteers was able to provide tailored education, then on-site coaching, and tailored education and on-site coaching. And just to reflect for both of those projects, so in Renfrew County, there's now 2 new annualized FTEs providing a combination of the coaching as well as geriatric assessment. And now with the adult day programs within Ottawa, the organization that we seconded the coach from is looking at how they can repurpose some of their existing resources to do this kind of model on an ongoing basis. So in everything we're doing, we're testing and we're trying to build a case for where we go from here. And similarly, we're now doing a Central Ottawa coaching project where there is a mapping of organizations across all of Central Ottawa against this competencies framework. And through those discussions, we're starting to build an idea of where the learning gaps are for them to meet whatever level on the pyramid they've identified as a goal. And she's also providing this intensive coaching model. So for this initiative, the main question was, how are we going to improve our ability across our region in how we understand and manage behaviors in people living with dementia? So we certainly know there's a lot of education and training that's provided in this area. It's an enormous need. We know that things like behaviors lead to discharges from adult day programs, presentations to hospitals. So it's not something that we wanted to do in a pocket of the system. We wanted to look across. We wanted to look at doing something that had the potential of sustainability, just in the way that we have with every project we've done so far. And we were very focused on where are the opportunities to do this in a way where we're building collaboration and partnerships across those levels of the pyramid for dementia knowledge and care coordination. So the proposition was that we trained 30 coaches in a specific approach, the Teepa Snow Positive Approaches to Care. Part of the appeal of that program was that there was an actual training of how to be a coach that was integrated within that. We offered the training for these coaches for free, and what we asked from organizations in return was that they make a 2-year commitment to providing staff time for coaching. And to be clear, in general, for the community-based coaches that we trained, we were asking them to not just use this in their regular practice, but to be matched to other programs to provide this coaching. The coaches are working within the framework, the proposition was that they would work within our existing framework of observation, assessment, and then using a standardized curriculum that's made up of 12 modules, which they can pull from depending on the needs of the organization. They provide training, and then they provide the coaching as well, because they've made this commitment to provide a certain number of hours of coaching in the practice setting for the 2-year period. So at this point in time, most of the community support services now have a coach embedded. We're trialing it in 4 acute care settings, a specialized care setting, and in long-term care. So I mentioned the Foundation for Implementation. The organizational commitment, so in January, February of last year, we asked all organizations to sign off. So even for acute care hospitals that were receiving the training, we said to them, we understand we're not going to match you in a community setting. However, we need your commitment that these people that we train can actively participate in a community of practice network. They will use our evaluation tools, and they'll work with our project management staff on how they're going to use this in different ways within their setting. And some of the hospitals, so Bonnie will speak to this, but Pembroke Regional Hospital, for example, has really used this in a very interesting across-the-board kind of way. We did a community presentation in March by Teepa Snow. When she came up to do the training of the coaches in person, we utilized that opportunity to do a broad-based open presentation where we actively encouraged managers and directors from all of our organizations to go and for an hour and a half learn more about this approach, what we were trying to do, and why it was so important. The coaches training, which consists of an online module, 2 days in person, and then 3 follow-up touch bases with mentors, took place from March through July. And we really kicked off the coaching process where those who were matched were, making those relationships, and things were starting to roll in other practice settings in October. But to be clear, some of our coaches finished their mentorship phone calls quite early, and so they've been rolling for quite a while and testing out the methodology and the curriculum in a variety of settings. We've also been working to identify complementarity with other approaches. So I think I mentioned that what we're doing here, obviously this has to do with the Teepa Snow Positive Approaches to Care, but there could have been other options. We chose it because it had the best fit for what our focus was, because it had the coaches module, but we're really clear that it's actually quite complementary to other trainings that are available and out there, and that staff are actively participating in. So I'm going to turn things over to Bonnie so she can really walk you through what that implementation process has looked like, and then I'll be wrapping up with some of the pieces around evaluation and considerations going forward.
Good afternoon, everyone, and hello to everybody on OTN. So as Natasha said, what I'm going to do is go over a little bit of how the coaching actually rolled out for the adult day programs, how we've moved it into long-term care and other settings such as hospital, and then spend just a few minutes looking at some of the lessons learned to date. So first of all, stepping way back to about a year ago when we became coaches, the 30 of us that went and spent 2 days with Teepa and her team, some of the coaches were already staff of adult day programs. Others, like myself, who are a PRC or outreach nurses or staff working in hospitals, knew that we would have commitments to our own organizations to provide Teepa Snow coaching, but that we would be paired with an adult day program as well. And so that commitment was 24 hours per year for the 2 years. And what started out first was Natasha and Jama connected with all of us and let us know which ADPs we would be paired with. And some of us were having co-coaches. So I have a co-coach named Emily Moses. And we got together and sort of brainstormed a little bit and then connected and reached out to the directors and managers of the ADPs. We went out and met with them, and we kind of told them a little bit about the initiative, what we could offer, and looked at the overview of Teepa Snow, and then just started to explore some of those areas of what they feel their staff and volunteers needed. Some of the coaches were able to do the next piece where they did some observation. They actually went out to the ADP prior to any education starting. They had a chance to observe interactions between clients and the staff and chat with some of the staff and volunteers to see, what are some of their educational needs. After that, some pre-surveys were created by, once again, by Natasha and Jama. And those pre-surveys we were given to the directors and managers that they would share with their staff and volunteers and then scan back to us, and we'd have that information. And those pre-surveys, what they involved were such questions such as trying to get at what they felt their level of experience was. Did they see themselves as novice, maybe more competent? Had they had already other courses, such as GPA, as we've mentioned? And such things as, did they feel they wanted more information on resources that were available, triggers, physical techniques, how to deal with responsive behaviors, those kinds of things. So we got that sort of information through those pre-surveys. At the same time, we were doing coaching for ADPs was also rolling out in long-term care facilities and other settings, retirement homes and hospitals. What we did find is the pre-survey had lots of great information in it, but it was about 2 pages long. And what we found is when we were doing these sessions in long-term care, we didn't have as much time with the participants. We might only have 45 to 60 minutes, and it was eating into a little bit too much of our actual coaching time. So they regrouped and gave us a 1-pager that we could actually just give out prior to the session to get a little bit of that information. So once we gathered all that intel, the next thing we did was to meet, the co-coaches met together and planned for what we felt our particular ADP needed. And the same was happening in hospital and long-term care. So we got together and planned those coaching sessions at least for the first year. We know that there's so much material from Teepa Snow that we want to share, but what to start with in that first year commitment. And so in talking to many of the coaches, and we have this community of practice I'll mention later, but these were the main topics that we found was people were interested in from the surveys and from the observations. Monique Thibault was one of the people who shared this first bullet. She did some of Teepa Snow's gems. She included an overview of the PowerPoint of the gems. She did some think, pair, and share about a day program client, for example. And then she used that gem model to look at challenges and to sketch some new approaches. So I really like this one. This has been the nice thing about us having the opportunity in this community of practice to share. So I'm going to be using that in the next year. Another really popular one was Teepa's 5 ways to say I'm sorry. So we had some scenarios and then used her 5 ways to say I'm sorry wheel to work through that. And then the last 3 points are probably the ones that were certainly used the most. Through everybody pretty much used these, which is her Teepa Snow's signature coaching, which is types of vision changes, her positive physical approach, which uses 3 zones of awareness, so looking at personal safety in terms of public space, personal space, and intimate space. And the nice thing is that her strategies really dovetail well with other courses out there, such as gentle persuasive approaches and dementia care. So certainly at the ADP I was paired with, some of the participants had GPA in the past and in hospitals and long-term care, so that seemed familiar to them, and it really sort of solidified things. And then the hand under hand, so we got out the applesauce. I'll talk a bit about how much about the coaching process in the next couple of slides, but actually doing practice and how it can be used in different ways, helping people get from A to B, how to use it to help someone eat, with personal care, etc. So just to tell you a little bit of how the coaching works, the actual process of coaching, which was new to many of us actually when we met with Teepa Snow. She uses this positive approach to care coaching cycle, but what it does is it uses video. So we would model the skill as a coach, and then using video, you would film the participants doing the skill. So once that had been done, we had the opportunity to sort of connect with that person and then sort of seek what, the seek piece was sort of saying, what do you think went well? And Teepa always used lots of fingers. What do you think went well? Is there anything that you think could be improved? Sort of would reflect on that. And then the explore piece was, well, let's take a look, and look at the video. And people would say, oh yeah, I did, that went well, but oh, I think I could, oh, I didn't even realize I didn't do that, or I did that instead. And so they had a chance to look at that video and then say, well, why don't we try it again? And then there would be a new skill and we'd do it again. So I'll talk a bit more about that under lessons learned too. So then in evaluating impact, as Natasha mentioned, some people have gotten to this part, as some of us are just at this part where the post-survey piece is occurring in the adult day program. So once all the sessions were done, a post-survey was created, and again, that kind of looked at things such as, did they feel they had gained a better understanding of the resources that were available, better understanding of dementia, those practical techniques, but also gave them the opportunity to reflect on the overall satisfaction with that coaching and training, and did they feel that there were some areas where that could be improved. So that was sent to the managers and the directors, again, of those ADPs to be completed by the staff and volunteers there, and then scanned back to us to share with Natasha and Jana. Once again, they were kind enough to create a one-pager, because the post-survey is actually 3 pages long, so lots of great information in it, but again, a little bit too long for the long-term care and hospital settings. We still have to figure that out within our community of practice, because those ADP, it's not only a one-time post-survey, it's hopefully going to be repeated at 6 months and 6 months. And so the struggle is in long-term care, for example. I'm more familiar with that. It's not everybody has email addresses and sort of how to connect to all the different people that have attended. If you give them a survey right after, great, you've got it, but if you want to connect with those people again and how they're feeling 3 or 6 months later, is how to do that logistically. We'll have to try to think more about that. And then Natasha was telling me about people sitting on a regional ADP group, the Champlain Dementia Network and Community Support Network, where those managers and directors can give that feedback and really discuss some of that general impacts of the coaching that their staff and volunteers have experienced. And then I've been alluding to community of practice. And I have to thank very much, again, Natasha and Gemma, because I'm sure that it's been hours that you've spent on it. I know you have, and we appreciate it. But she pulled us all together, all 30 coaches, and gave us a space to have these meetings where we, either through Zoom or through over the phone and in person, and then she does all these minutes, so if you couldn't make that meeting, at least you could read all about it, and have the chance for us to share ideas, and this has worked better this way, and doing that kind of thing. And I understand that this will at least continue through next year, and hopefully after that we'll take it over ourselves. I'm sure you're going to say thanks, but it's been a lot of work for you. So just to spread it out a little bit, to talk about how it's rolled out in other sectors. Last spring, we have 3 major trainers in our area, so Mary Prince, Lana McDonald, and Nancy Paquin. What we decided is to join with them and do 3-hour sessions for across the LHIN. So we did them in Renfrew County and Ottawa in English and French, and down in Cornwall as well. And we started with the RPN and PSW behavioral support champions that are in long-term care. And we had these 3-hour sessions in the different regions. And we focused mostly on hand under hand, and had it was a good networking day for them as well, so they were able to all connect and discuss and work on some of those skills. And we were able to train about 80 people there. Natasha has talked a little bit about how it's rolled out in some of the hospitals like Pembroke Regional Hospital and Renfrew, Victoria. And Melinda Ritza was telling us that in Pembroke, and I think Renfrew as well, that it's become mandatory to have a 3-hour session on Teepa snow for the RNs that are working on medical floors, so they've made that mandatory. They are noticing, apparently she was telling us they have been noticing a reduction in code white numbers, but I must say, so I'm glad to say that that's occurring, but also I know from Pembroke Hospital that they've also really been doing, sending a lot of staff to pieces as well, and having gentle persuasive approaches in dementia care courses and refreshers there too, so working hard there. Across Champlain, we also every year offer a 2-day PSW enhanced training in English and in French. And what we did is Mary Prince and Diane Gravel and I, who teach that quite often, decided to look at that agenda and tweak it to put in some of the Teepa snow strategies. So that's what we've done. We've added that in there. So in this past year, we've probably had about 90 PSWs who went through that course and had the benefit of having these Teepa snow strategies. And then the short coaching sessions in long-term care. So this is very popular. People are really asking, can you come? Can you do some of that? And for myself, I know we've been able to go and provide them in English and in French. We've been at Raison Saint-Louis and Elizabeth Rière, and I know that other colleagues in Starwood and Glebe and different facilities. I don't have final numbers. I would have them probably year-end, but the ones I've been involved with, about 215 people. So really, and lots of demand to have those sessions get started and get going. So talking a little bit about lessons learned, this is something that we'll discuss certainly at the community of practice. But here's some of the common comments about hand under hand. And this is again from Monique Thibaucher that with us, but I was hearing the same thing, and I think others too, that some of the strategies, such as that hand under hand approach, would not always be well received from persons with dementia in the earlier stages, perhaps more applicable to clients in long-term care. So there's so much Teepa information though to share. We just have to sort of think more about that, and even connect with the Teepa group and come up with some ideas of how to assist clients who are earlier on in their journey with dementia. Flexibility and approach is really important. So I told you a little bit about using video, which, as you can imagine, is a bit of a nightmare sometimes. You're supposed to use people's phones to video, and of course, how do you do a video, and then like if there's not enough storage on the video, and the screen is small, and people forgot the glasses on the unit, you know, so we had a few of those challenges. Ideally, tablets would be best. But there could be a cost to that, a cost of equipment, and we'll have to figure that sort of thing out. The other thing, quite frankly, is that people are like, you have to video me? Really? They're not struck on it, you know. To begin with, they're not really happy about being videoed. But what happens is, we noticed, is that really fades away quite quickly. Most people have been really good humored and go with it. And then they really see the benefit of having the video and saying, oh my goodness, you're right. Let me try that again. So there is great value. I can see why Teepa Snow wants to use the video. And like I said, most people are willing to go with it once we get started. Pros and cons of not having a set curriculum. So as I said, Teepa Snow has so much great material, but it's not necessarily packaged in a, you know, modules that here you go, it's all ready for you on a silver platter. The pros of that is that once you become much more familiar with her material, you can take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and provide what is needed for the setting you're in. But at first, it can feel a little bit overwhelming. So I wanted to give a special thanks to Karina Sear from GPCSO, who worked with Natasha and myself, so that we could pull together, spend some time to create those 12 presentations that Natasha mentioned. So a menu, so that all 30 of us aren't doing the same and wasting time working on it. 3 of us just sort of made these 12 PowerPoints, short, but with information such as the video clip that would work well with that, so that as a starting out point, people could go out and sort of pick from there and head out to do the coaching. The idea of trainers versus coaches, I'm sort of still on the fence about this because I've really enjoyed the opportunity. I'm often doing training, so to have that experience of coaching was really good. However, I'm still a bit on the fence because people like myself are not particularly connected day to day with a certain facility or a program. Perhaps, if we, you know, hindsight 2020, if half of us might have become trainers and the other half coaches and paired together, but we're still thinking about that. Sessions for families connected to ADPs. So that's not been sort of part of the program. The training and coaching was for actually staff and volunteers working at the ADP, not necessarily for families. But we, I know Emily and I did one session for families. The ADP we were connected with asked if that was a possibility, and we said sure, so we did it, and it was really well received. So we put that out to just have a discussion amongst our community of practice to see if that might be a possibility, and also discuss that with the Teepa Snow group. So need for groups to be very small, and you can imagine that so to do that kind of coaching, groups really need to be small, no more than 4 or 5 per coach in order to use the video and really work the skill. So I'll combine that with the last bullet, that winter 2019 has been really brutal. So we've had to regroup, and things have been canceled. And certainly the session that Emily and I did last week, that's sort of what happened, is that people who might have been supposed to be at one showed up to the other one. So we had a huge group of people, and the room was really small. So we had to just adjust. We did a little bit of coaching, and it became more of a training and connection group. But it's something to think about. And then difficulty to do coaching sessions in 45 to 60 minutes. I think that's because I talk too much, and that's probably my problem, but as we did more and more of the coaching sessions, it got smoother and smoother. We became more comfortable, and we shaved things off, but it is difficult to do sessions in a short amount of time. I think it's certainly in hospital, even retirement home and long-term care settings, it's not always easy to start right on time. It's very difficult for people to get off the unit to that session, and then once they're there, you know, they know that they have the pressure to get back. And so making sure that we don't, there's so much stuff we want to share from Teepa Snow, that we don't put too much in one session and keep it a little bit shorter, so that we're able to to provide that session in a good amount of time.
So just a few things. As I said, we are talking about the Teepa Snow positive approaches to care and how we've implemented that, but to things to think about in implementing this kind of strategic across-the-board approach is very early on, we had management buy-in, and not just from a couple of the agencies, but really across all of the organizations that were going to be involved. We've actually had a couple of cases where management has changed over during the course of the project, and they were then not interested in really being engaged because they hadn't had some of that upfront development of the idea. The model versus the approach. So this is where, when I said earlier on, it wasn't necessarily that Teepa Snow positive approaches to care was the only way that we could go. What we knew was that the approach and how we did this was as important as whatever training we offered. So having people from different practice settings linked into new settings, having them really understand what the staff and volunteers were doing, what they needed, tailoring the offering of education to them, and then coaching them and putting that into practice. That was the essential part of what we were doing. And you know, we could have chosen Teepa Snow, we could have looked at how to make adjustments to GPA using a similar format, but that was, the approach was actually probably more important than the model. The coach's skills, so Bonnie touched on this, so when you're trying to do this across the board kind of work, as she said, we very carefully selected staff to train from the ADPs, from acute care hospital, from amongst the psychogeriatric resource consultants or long-term care, because there's a particular series of skills required here. It's not enough if you're at intermediate or advanced level of knowledge of dementia. It's about your ability to connect with people, to teach, to present, to observe. So having that right mix of skills is really crucial, and that's where supporting the coaches is so important. So completely organically, before we were even organized as networks to start sending these coaches out, because we were having them come together within the community of practice network, they were already making linkages with each other and talking about how could we offer this together? What do you think this would look like? Which parts of the curriculum should we pull? And they were going out together and testing the approach in different settings and seeing what worked and what didn't work. So creating the linkages amongst all of that, sort of a disparate group of staff actually that we trained, who were working in different settings to learn from each other and support each other, was crucially important. I think one of the things that is important is that we did this across the system. So this isn't just about the adult day programs or just about the Alzheimer's Society and how they do business, or in acute care or in long-term care. The way we've done this and the number of coaches we were able to train and deploy in different settings means that there starts to become a common language around some of these things. And it starts to build those relationships between people who are, because the adult day program staff who are trained as coaches are more typically novice or intermediate, but now they have linkages to people in the system who are at the advanced level. Having common frameworks for something like this is essential. So as Bonnie said, it was a real challenge at the beginning that there wasn't a set curriculum, and we didn't need a 2-day set curriculum, this is how you do it, but we needed a common core of modules that people could pull from. And in fact, I think what we'll do is just to attach to the materials after this, we will send one of those PowerPoint modules, because it will be useful to you to see how the concepts are introduced. There's video, brief videos of Teepa Snow within it, so you can get a sense of what that looks like. And having the administrative and planning support to do things like common education frameworks and common evaluation. So just in terms of next steps, we as networks are going to continue to support the Community of Practice Network, the periodic evaluation reports, and looking at how we refine the approach. So we're working quite closely with Teepa Snow just around the flexibility that it needs to be in place for us to do things in this way, to explore how we do this with families. We'll keep linking coaches with each other, but one of the things that's underlying all of this work is we're going to see broader are opportunities for learning and transformation through this process. So, for example, within the Adult Day program setting, there are probably some essential things that will come out of this in terms of how they program, how they structure their offerings, that will start to come to light through this kind of a process and through the community of practice. So those are just some things to think about in terms of how we've approached this. So thanks again for inviting us to present. I know we have a couple of minutes for questions, but I'll just leave our contact information up as well.